Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning for those of you who are joining across the time zones. I'm Laura Kistart. I am the president of the Andover Newton Alumni Board or chair. I don't remember what the formal title is. Thank you for the applause, Davida. Um, and we're so excited that you've joined us for this new program. This is something that we are trying for the first time, an alumni forum, and we're grateful to Randy Meyer for agreeing to pilot this with us. This is an opportunity to try to connect alumni across many physical places, across many generations and class years and things in a virtual way, so that recognizing that it's easy for us to sign on to a Zoom from wherever you are, and hopefully get to see each other's faces as we're able. And we are going to hear a presentation from Randy about his ministry and his church for about 20 or so minutes, and then that will be followed by some Q&A time. So we hope that this can be conversational, an opportunity to get to see some people, hopefully get to meet someone new. And so as we said, just thank you so much for being here, and thank you to David Smith, who is on the staff of Andover Newton Seminary, who's managing our tech support and admitting people to Zoom. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Randy.
All right. Well, it's good to see everyone. I know a lot of you. Some of my friends from seminary. I see Tim Layton there, and other folks that I've run into over the years in different places and circumstances. So I'm glad to be here to share a little bit about the ministry here at the Good Shepherd United Church of Christ. We are about 35 miles north of the U.S.-Mexico border. And I arrived here 28 years ago. That was back when the desert was, and the immigration issues were much different. And I know all of us are dealing with immigration issues in some form in our communities and our ministry today. Um, we've been dealing with it really since I got here 28 years ago. In 94, the free trade agreements were passed. The wall had started to go up even back then. What I'd like to talk about is really just how we got into a ministry of hospitality and loving our neighbor um, all those years ago, and how it continues still today. So I'm going to share some pictures here. Um, and we will, oh, hold on 1 second. Um, let's go to okay, so now, oh, wait. All right, I'm back. There, can everybody see that? I hope.
Yes.
All right. So that's the beautiful Sonoran Desert, and it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous desert, very, very fragile environment. And um, here's a couple other pictures of just, the gorgeous desert. The saguaros, the mesquite, the uh, all the different plants. It's just a very, very beautiful, but very fragile and very dangerous um, part of our world. Um, this is part of the border wall that started to go in back in 94. And then it's just progressively gotten more challenging over the years. And, now they're in the process of building double wall. Our government has intentionally used the desert as really a deterrent, where they push the most desperate and poor people of the world out in the desert, saying that people will not be that desperate. Nobody will be that desperate to cross in the most dangerous parts. And yet, that's where people are crossing, and there's been thousands and thousands of deaths and destruction. You see these saguaros. Um, we actually have many sightings of jaguar right now, and yet the wall is going to pretty much stop the jaguar from um, using these valleys and immigration routes. Um, More wall. So in our area over the last 20 25 years, 30 years, there has been over 4,288 deaths. But that also means those are the only the apprehended or recovered remains. There's been many, many more than that have died out in the desert. Um, in fact, we always consider it usually 2 to 3 times as many. That's just in our area. So we uh, we began to see that the deaths that were happening right in our neighborhood. So what do you do when dead bodies are recovered in your neighborhood? As a church, we began to study not only scripture but the politics of what was happening. Um, and so we find in Leviticus, there's been biblical references to loving one's neighbor, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. In Leviticus, we see the Lord tells Israel, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. It evidences that even those ancient communities had an ethic of taking care of the neighbor, taking care of even their enemies, because the desert, even over there, was very deadly. Uh, so you continue on and you find that same reference to neighbors is then found in all three of the synoptic gospels in the greatest commandment. This one right here is from Mark. The most important is here. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. That's the Mark passage. In Mark, it's found right as Jesus makes the triumphal entry into Jerusalem and at the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper, he is uh, in Mark, he says he gives them this great commandment. In Matthew, we find the exact same commandment in kind of buried in the middle of the gospel, kind of as a sign that it is the heart and soul of the gospel, and that it's foundational. All other commands depend on loving God with heart, soul, and mind. Um, and then in Luke, uh, it's interesting. I find it really interesting that um, the passage uh, is immediately following the Great Commandment is the story of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan, uh, the great parable that Jesus tells about the the Samaritan that is out on the road to Jericho, and well, the a man is traveling down the road to Jericho and is robbed, and the Levite and the high priest kind of leave him on the side of the road, and but the Samaritan comes around and actually ministers to the man. Not only that, he puts him on his donkey and he takes the man into uh, town and pays the innkeeper and says, take care of this man and I'll be back. Um, at the end of the passage, um, the man said that Jesus asked, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robber? And the man says, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus says to go and do likewise. Um, to go just like the Samaritan, to go out and um, not only take care of your neighbor, but to also be extravagant in that care. So we've been working on the discipline to go and do likewise, to show mercy, to love your neighbor. We figured long ago that our politicians, both the Republicans and the Democrats, um, have had lots of time to work on resolving our immigration issues, but they've chosen to not do anything but build more wall and make it more dangerous. And so we've chosen as a church to develop ministries that actually go out and give first aid and water and support to migrants. So the name of our organization that sits under the Good Shepherd United Church of Christ is a organization called the Samaritans. We go out and put life-saving water in the desert, uh, in a pretty large section of the desert. Uh, and it's considered this area is considered the most dangerous crossing into the United States. So we have older people, younger people that do this. We're out there every single day, sometimes twice a day, in all parts of the desert, putting out water. Here's some of our water. But when we get out there, when we started putting water out, we thought that was all that we needed to do. But as we were putting water out, we began to find more, we began to run into people that really needed our support. And so this young man had crossed and had been out there, out in the desert for 3 days and desperately needed some help. And so we were there to give him first aid and get him the help that he needed. Um, I'll show you a bunch of pictures. There's just lots of different encounters with migrants out in the desert. Um, these are actually asylum seekers that are the difference we see is that the migrants that are coming to work and are not, for whatever reason, have need to make the journey. We call them travelers, and are not going to be asking for asylum. Uh, are usually dressed in camouflage. These folks right here were all asylum seekers, probably a couple years before President Trump took office. We were finding just literally hundreds a day out there. And so we actually would go out there, leave the church at 4 and get out in the desert by 6 in the morning so that we could have breakfast ready and take care of families and get them ready because the Border Patrol would come and pick them up. Um, so that's part of our ministry. But in the adventures and the going out in the desert, we began to meet many of the ranchers and community people. This man is called Jim Chilton. He has a large ranch right along the wall and along the border. Jim was very upset that migrants were cutting his water lines. And so, because we were out there and we were in conversation with our neighbor, we were able to work out some ways that what could we do to help his situation. And what we came up with was uh, if we had a spring-loaded water spigot on his water lines, then the migrants could get their water and it would automatically go off, shut off, and he would not be complaining about the migrants. And so we did that. That was about 15 years ago, and really he became a big supporter of ours. Jim is a registered Republican. He spoke at the Republican National Convention. Um, and yet he works with us very closely. He allows us on his property to put water out and to look for migrants. And we have a very cordial relationship. Um, this is another rancher from the Mexican side. This is Francisco, and just another one of our neighbors. He has about 5 dogs out there usually, and so we support him. We give his dogs some food, and we always have some oranges and apples for he and his horse. We also work a lot with the Border Patrol. Many people think that we're have a difficult relationship and they won't work with us. Actually, it goes up and down, but many of the agents are very supportive of us, and we do have relationships. We know them by name. Um, in fact, there was a time where they would actually be calling us along the wall to see if we could tell them if anybody was out there because it's a long, it's an hour drive to get out to the end of the wall, a very desolate part of the desert. So the Border Patrol we do work with, they are actually coming to our camp and we're helping them load some folks into their vehicle. They were asylum seekers. Another incident where we were there helping a bunch of migrants, and then the Border Patrol came in um, to receive the migrants after we had taken care of them. But we also know that the agents, this area of the desert, has been the laboratory for law enforcement for developing law enforcement techniques and technology. And so we do keep a healthy relationship, but we also try to keep uh, some objectivity about it as well. The other issue now, once we have all these agents, all this technology, we now have a lot of military out along the border. Um, when we started putting water out, we were going to save lives, but we also had another point in our um, ministry was, we need to be telling the story of what's happening out in the desert and along the wall because it's not just the Border Patrol, it's not just the federal government that has a perspective. We as people of faith are really important in this conversation. So here's the Border Patrol or the military putting um, concertina wire on the wall. There's always something more that they're trying to do to stop people. It doesn't really stop people, but it's a lot of money. Um, these are the kinds of encounters we have quite frequently now with the Stryker military vehicle. Um, Here my friend Aurelio is coming around that military vehicle there. They won't let us um, along the wall road sometimes, and so we were hiking out there. Um, a couple of weeks ago, I found this couple military helmets and a backpack. They were very remote part of the desert, and about 15 minutes later, just as I was going to put that helmet on, uh, the soldiers showed up. This is actually the Mexican military that we run into. All of the, some of this is to show the different sorts of neighbors, the different relationships we do have. We have given water to Mexican military. We've given water to Border Patrol many, many times. We've given other food and whatnot to Border Patrol and the military out there. This is an encounter with a cartel member. We don't want, the last thing we want is to have enemies out in the desert. This was a cartel member. Yeah, we're actually on the US side, but the cartel usually would pass people right through here. Those 3 guys in the black and the camouflage are cartel members. They would take pictures of everybody that was crossing and we would receive them and then call the Border Patrol. Um, just, my point is that I'm not going to, as a person out, as a humanitarian out in the desert, it's not my job to decide who is who. As a person of faith, I'm going to give food and water to anybody I find out there. And even though the Border Patrol would say you're helping the cartel, our position is we don't want the cartel as an enemy because that's not going to allow us to do our work out in the desert. Um, and then this is the militia that we have out there. Um, our our approach is to talk to everybody, to de-escalate situations and find some common ground. And so this is a militia group that was out there just not too long ago, over the Easter holiday that we ran into. And um, our experience with the militia is that they usually are pretty harmless. They're, at least to us, they like to film us and yell at us and all that. Um, but we've also had times where we've had conversation, had shared some coffee and hot chocolate, and had conversation. Um, and finally, this is a protester that was in front of the Good Shepherd for 3 or 4 years that had a sign that said Good Samaritan, Bad American. I always liked the sign. Um, but we treated this man very well. We would go out and talk to him. Groups would show up. Congregation members would go out and talk with him. And many of our folks liked it because he kind of showed where people need to make the turn. So our just some final pictures of as a church, we haven't just stayed in our building and said, you know, people need to arrive here for us to take care of them. Just like Jesus went to the margins, we go to the margins and have and do hospitality and care for our neighbor and are able to build bridges where if we weren't there, we wouldn't have relationships with the Border Patrol. We wouldn't be able to tell what the military is doing out there. Um, we do have people in our community that are very against the work that we do. Many of my neighbors are Border Patrol, but part of loving your neighbor and being engaged in humanitarian work is to discipline yourself so that you're not getting hooked into um, you know, the hysteria of the moment or not getting hooked into, just saying, um, saying comments or saying things that are going uh, to uh, enrage people or make people more violent. And so we really have to practice um, our, we have to practice de-escalating. We have to practice the discipline is to even when somebody is upset with your position and your work, how do you still act out of a place of love and not get engaged into uh, a bigger conflict and in some ways do more damage to our movement than um, doing the positive work of engaging people and really practicing care and love for everybody, even if they disagree with you. I believe that's what's happening really around the country. I know some of the pastors in Minnesota have really, I've had a couple conversations with folks there, and being able to stay centered and not get pulled into conversations or arguments to really just very quietly practice your love and your humanitarian response, and to put yourself in places where you can actually bring healing and hope, rather than bringing more violence or challenges. So with that, I may have a couple more pictures. Um, I think that's where I'm going to leave the conversation, and then hopefully we can have more conversation now. I know many folks have been down here. And I invite
Yeah.
anybody that wants to come down. I know Laura has been down a couple times. We have lots of groups. We have 6 or 7 youth groups that will be coming through this summer to experience the border, to cross the border. We have a lot of projects in Mexico as well. And so we're always open to pastors, groups, individuals, anybody that wants to come down, mainly because we're doing it every day, and it's easy for us to just include a few more people in that. So um, I open it up for questions or comments.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Randy. That's you read my mind because that was I was going to lead us in that direction of just
Mhm.
if people wanted to get involved and know more about you and the church and things. Yeah, that's I first met Randy I think in when he received the Spirit of the Hill Award. It was the fall of 2019, and he came to campus and kind of shared some of these updates like he just shared with us today. And I brought a group of students at the time to down in March of 2020. So we were the last group that he took across the border for a couple years, and then got to go back last year as well. So yeah, we open it up for your questions and things that you want to know from Randy about this ministry.
Or also your experiences now with ICE or Border Patrol, and what you might be doing. Hopefully, there's a few questions.
Yeah, well, hey, Randy,
Hey, Tim.
this isn't a question, it's an observation.
Uh,
You know, and of course, going back the many years we've known each other, I've sort of followed your arc and what you've been doing. And I think one of the things that you said that struck me, and I hadn't really thought about this. I mean, I've known that you all have had these relationships with the different groups and with the Border Patrol and so forth. But it struck me that in this moment when we're so polarized and just the political violence that continues to, rear its ugly head in our communities, that the sort of centered approach that you're taking and of working with all the communities and showing them hospitality and sort of modeling a way that we can work with groups that we don't necessarily agree with, both politically and structurally in what they're doing, but you're doing it with integrity. And it just struck me that that's a model that we all need to, that may be the larger thing that you're teaching all of us, because most of us aren't living 35 miles from the border, but we're all struggling with how to engage people that are, divisive in our communities and
mhm,
not foster the divisiveness and create a more sane and stable, and creating dialogue partners. And I think I really
mhm,
appreciate that you made that connection and sort of emphasized that in what you were sharing with us. So I just wanted to, you know, that would be a great sort of seminar to begin to roll out for a wider audience.
mhm. Yeah. I mean, I do think it really, what I find in ministry is it really is a discipline that you practice um, day in and day out. And by practicing that, you do become more and more centered and able to handle those situations. And we learn. I mean, I've been in situations that I haven't actually been proud of, but I've learned from those situations of, hey, I didn't really handle that militia guy that well. That's not what I really want to project to the wider world. So, um, at any rate, thank you, Tim. Other comments?
Yeah,
Um,
hi, Randy. It's Davita. Um, I'm sitting here struck by what I experienced the one Sunday I got to worship at your church with my cousin several
mm,
years ago. That that your congregation seems to have adopted a good part of the same um, spirit, and I'm thinking about your work in the desert as a pastoral ministry to your people in modeling for them a way to live in the midst of this world. I wonder if you could say something about the impact on your congregation of this work, not just they're doing the work, but how
yeah.
they now are living in the midst of it all.
Yeah, I mean, I think not everybody, definitely not everybody in the congregation is involved in these ministries, but they're all in some way supportive of it. And they are because the Good Shepherd is pretty visible in this in our community and our stands on immigration and a lot of other issues. Um, just being a member, they're engaged by people in the community. So they've learned, hey, we don't you don't have to say a whole lot. It's just that, we're going to continue to love people, and we're going to it's not our job to be the border patrol. It's not our job to be lots of things. Our job as people of faith is solely to be people that love our neighbor and practice that in a radical way. So um, I do think um, that's basically where we come from. And for the most part, you know, we do have people that show up at the church. Many of them want to be part of the church because of those things, but we do have sometimes people that want to create problems or want to have a, a, a divisive conversation. So we have to be prepared for that, but you also have to practice. You can't live your life or live your ministry as that you're always going to be, you always have to be fearful of something bad happening. So, um, yeah,
Sort of imagining that learning that self-discipline carries over into family, into the workplace,
mhm.
as well as into the life of the church. It's such a wonderful model. Thank you for living it so deeply.
Well, I also, it really is, I there was I always really enjoyed the theologian John Sobrino, who talks a lot about following. Are you following Jesus or are you following Christ? Um, and his point is, Jesus as a living being really practiced radical hospitality and was in places and that's really, from my perspective, that's what got him in trouble, was he was always doing ministry in places that the religious leaders and political leaders thought, hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing ministry there with those people? They're, you know, unclean, or they're, all sorts of different things. And Jesus modeled that that's where I'm going to do ministry, and I'm going to do it with everybody. I look at it as when I took my ordination vows, I did not take a vow just to minister to people in the United States. I I believe that my vows um, didn't have boundaries or borders or walls, and that in that sense, to be able to do ministry anywhere and everywhere to all people is really important. And it's important if we are going to follow Jesus that we really follow Jesus into the places where it might not be, um, it, that the wider community might not agree with how we're doing ministry. Our political leaders might not agree with that either. At any rate, I hope that answers some of that.
Thanks.
We have a couple questions lined up. I believe Shannon is next, followed by Matthew and Amma Leslie.
Hi, Randy. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So my questions are, how did you start? Like what training modules or models do you use? I'm thinking folks don't show up at the
Yeah.
door always knowing how to,
Yeah.
how to do the work. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, and I use Jesus as a model. Jesus, when he called his first disciples, he didn't say you got to go through this training. He said you're going to learn on the way. And so that really is our model, is that people show up, and we have our Samaritan meeting every other Monday morning. And so we have lots of new people always show up. And so we have ways to engage them, but we also have ways to get them out with experienced people so they can see a lot of different ministries. We drop water, we do searches, we go into Mexico and work at shelters, we go into the courts. We work in our own community with migrants that are really underground in a sense. And so there's lots of ways that we can engage people. And so, but we also do have a training. We have training we do it with our sister organization, the Tucson Samaritans. So we receive medical training, we have legal training. Um, and we have social workers that are working with us, and so there is a lot of training. And then in most of our meetings, we do a little bit of training, um, and so we are always training. But we all, to be a driver or to be kind of one of the leaders, you have to work with a lot of different folks, and be present a lot um, before you're kind of turned loose as a leader, because we just have way too many issues um, that you have to be able to maneuver around. So usually our groups that go out in the desert, we usually have a medical person, a Spanish speaker, and then a driver. So there's usually groups of three. But we're always learning something. We're always, there's always something new that we've never experienced, or we ran into mothers with kids, so we started bringing all sorts of baby food and things for babies. We started finding dogs, so then we started bringing dog food. Uh, we had accidents or incidents, so we have lots of mechanical. Um, we have a lot of equipment to get us out of bad situations in the desert, because we now have satellite phones and a Starlink, because there's no cell phone coverage. So everything we're always learning something, but it's really 25 years of practicing and getting better.
Thank you.
Yep.
Matthew?
Yeah, Randy, I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about kind of the intersection between your church as the with this ministry, and how many folks in your congregation relative to also then you have a bunch of people, probably community folks? I mean, a lot
Um,
of us working in congregations kind of have this blend where our
yeah,
ministries now are, especially community-based stuff is kind of this intersection where you have folks that are drawn into particular ministry and may only participate in that. And
yeah,
um, just how you operate, that relative
yeah.
to your parish ministry.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Matt. Matt and I were in seminary at the same time. Um,
We were both Westerners who went east to
yes.
Andover, Newton and then Randy and I were both in Rhode Island too, and we both Randy was in Montana, I was from California, and the complaint in Rhode Island conference was that if you had to drive 15 minutes or longer, it was too far for a meeting.
Yeah,
And Randy and I used to chuckle because he drove like 4 hours in Montana for meetings, and I would go 2.5 hours for meetings in California.
that's right. Um, yeah, and even to do this ministry, we drive an hour and a half to get to a very remote part of the desert, and we don't really think anything of it. Um, so yeah, the organization is really, so people may not know that the sanctuary movement, which was a big movement in the United States, a religious movement that helped Central American migrants move through across the border, that were, basically their governments that were trained, the militaries in El Salvador and Guatemala were trained by our military to go out and massacre their own people. And so those people were ending up here in the desert. And so there's a long, long history of humanitarian work in the desert. Many of us, John Fife and Jim Corbett and some of those leaders of that movement, well, John Fife is still around. But that really was the foundation for us to learn about doing humanitarian work. Um, and John really walked me through how to set up the Samaritans here at the Good Shepherd. Um, it really, how we started was we had a big education event at the church. And at the end of the, we probably had 200 community people. And at the end of the meeting, we had a sign-up sheet. People wanted to volunteer to do humanitarian work. And we had 20, 25 people. And so we just called everybody together. And so our Samaritan group has always been and I always talk about this in my church, in my membership classes, is that um, the Samaritans is falls under our 501(c)(3) of the Good Shepherd. It's a ministry of the Good Shepherd, but it's really very open to everybody in the community. Many churches, it's too controversial, and so their churches aren't really actively engaged in the humanitarian work, but many of their members want to be, so they come over here. There's a lot of people that are fed up with church, won't go ever to a church, but they really believe in this work. And so, as church members, though, I always say, there's a cost and joy of being a part of a church, and there literally is everybody in the Samaritan group that is not a church member, if there's a problem like an arrest or there was an accident or anything, the church members are responsible for that. Legally, we are responsible because we own, even though the Samaritans, we have 5 vehicles, but all they bought them, but the church owns them and the UCC Insurance Board insures them. So there is a cost and joy. Everybody else can walk, but the church members, we believe in this ministry so much that we're willing to take the risk to make it happen. So that's really important. And that's why I love my church people because they believe in taking that risk. It we I know the legal arm of the UCC is would would be advising churches not to be involved in this. But I don't think that's what Jesus would say. Jesus would say that's exactly the risk that the church needs to be involved in. And so we're involved in it really deeply, and we engage a lot of non-church people who, I have a lot of people that say, and they even pledge to us. But they're not church people. They believe in this ministry a lot. Our budget is about $100,000 a year, and we never know where that money's going to come from, but it always comes. And that it's not part of our church budget. It really is a separate mission budget. So that's a little bit of how we really, we honor people's religious traditions, but we don't impose our religious um, our religiosity on everybody either. Other questions? I know somebody else had a question.
Hi, is my audio on?
Yes.
Hi. Um,
Hello.
I am in awe of this ministry, and I have tremendous respect for everyone involved and for you and for your church, and I thank you. I bless you for modeling, you know,
Mm.
the love of Christ and radical acceptance and all that. Um, but I wrote a few things here very quickly. You have talked about how you work with people who are politically opposed to you, but are
Mhm.
mostly cooperating with you. And I didn't hear anything about people who are opposed to you and are not cooperating with you, people who follow behind you and pour out
Oh,
water,
yeah.
political, officials who want to stop you, and other individuals who have
Mhm.
absorbed violent conservative messages and want to threaten you with violence. So, are you saying that doesn't happen? Or if that does happen, then how do you cope with those risks?
Yeah. So just over the Easter weekend, we had this militia group that was out in the desert. A lot of our water was destroyed. I had a cordial conversation with them, um, but it was very short and concise. But it was uh, at least an attempt to be in conversation with them. So much of our water in that area was destroyed, and we know it was by them. We know that in the recent months, um, the attitude of the Border Patrol has changed with us. Not everybody, but we've had many encounters recently where the Border Patrol is kind of looks down on us, and the military has tried to restrict us from getting
Mm,
to certain parts of the desert. We deal with that in the sense that we're not going to stop. That's not going to dissuade us. It's not going, we may change where we're going to put water, um,
mm,
so that it's a massive desert. We can walk another quarter of a mile on the trail, and if they want to walk that quarter of a mile, they may find it. But we're not going to stop. We have our own strategies on doing this, even if it's, we have water that's we put in places mainly knowing that it's going to be destroyed. Um,
mm,
we, my own approach with the military stopping us from getting to the area where the migrants are crossing is to hike around them. And so I hike 3 hours to get down to a place so I can put water where I know migrants are crossing. Um, and if they get helicoptered down there once in a while, but they're not hiking it.
mm,
So, some of it is some of it for me and our group, a lot of us is, you know, this is a beautiful, beautiful part of the desert. We have ministered to thousands and thousands of migrants, and um, something has, we say we've saved a lot of migrants, but in the process, our lives have been saved too. And we're not going to stop practicing that radical love just because people don't love us back. We're going to we're going to maybe practice the love more radically. So in some ways, it just empowers us to do more. Like right now, we used to find 100 migrants a day. Right now, we're not finding any, but we know in the community that people are seeing people and people are moving. And some of it is practicing a ministry where you're not really seeing the
Mhm.
results, but it's changing lives. So I hope that
Okay.
answered some of it.
Yeah.
Some of it is also we used to meet a lot with the Border Patrol. But a lot of those conversations didn't necessarily go anywhere. We meet with them when we have to, when there's a major situation, but just to meet with them so they can check it off the box and say we're working with community groups, we no longer necessarily do that. We want a fruitful conversation. We don't want to be treated as, you know, oh, we have to meet with those radical Christians once in a while. So, other
Well,
questions? Just a couple
Randy,
of,
it's
yeah.
it's great to see you again.
All
And
right,
it's Marty.
Marty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to see you. I know that in my ministry, I continue all these years later to draw on the prophetic and pioneering spirit of Andover Newton,
Uh-huh.
and I wonder what parts of your seminary experience influence your ministry still.
Oh, well, definitely. I remember the conversations and just the relationships that I developed at Andover Newton. Um, you know, were really very important. My field ed was really important. Being I served a church 2 years as in field ed. I also did a year. I was had the opportunity to study in at Seminario Biblico in Latin America in Costa Rica for a year, well, 6 or 8 months, which was really very powerful for me. I remember I did some direct study classes with Dan Novotny, and
mm,
who was really for me, he had been a longtime pastor,
mhm.
had worked with a lot of amazing people, and just to be one-on-one with somebody that had so much experience and wisdom was really important. I also did a direct study with Bob Pazmino too. So, yeah, I think for me, it was more the individual relationships. And I wish I took a lot more preaching. Um, there's a lot of stuff I wish I had done, but overall, I think Andover Newton was very good in formation. And then later I did do my Doctor of Ministry, which kind of solidified for me that I did learn a lot at Andover Newton. So um, at any rate, I hope that answers. It's good to see you. Are you still in Westminster?
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing you back again.
I'll be there this summer. Yeah.
All right, we'll
Yeah.
do coffee or something.
Yeah. All right. Any other comments? I can show you, let me show you a couple more slides, mainly because we we have been working in the desert, or some of the relationships that we've been able to develop over time. Uh, there's a small border community called Sasabe that was completely destroyed by the cartels, and all the families left. And we were able to, we did have a migrant shelter there. But just a couple of weeks ago, we've been working with the women in the community and they wanted to have a library for the kids. And so we helped them develop this library. And it really started because all these dogs were left in the community when all the families had to leave because there was so much cartel violence. And so some of our folks would go just a little bit across the border to feed the dogs. And then as things got safer and the cartel violence kind of is absent, we were able to develop this library with the women. They're really the ones that are running it, and we just had this dedication. But it was a beautiful little community project and now the women are. But we also in the process. These are all just by being present and developing relationships. They had two little league softball baseball teams but the kids didn't have uniforms or anything, and so we adopted the two uh, little league teams, and they named themselves the Sasabe Samaritanos.
Oh,
And so that's just a kind of a neat little story of how building these relationships and being present grows and builds other possibilities. We're in front of a building right there in Sasabe that the women are wanting to uh, develop that into a little restaurant. And then we're
oh,
also working with them about developing a little dispensary or not a dispensary, a food bank and a place where they can borrow tools and things like that. At any rate, that's just a little more of what can happen when you're present, and that
oh.
community is a long ways away from us, but we still are present with them. Some people call it mission creep, and I call it, isn't that's what ministry is supposed to be? It's about um, letting the spirit go and follow the spirit and see what ministries will develop. So, all right. Dave Peters, I see Dave Peters, good Silver Lake friend. So thank you.
We potentially have time for one more question. If not, we will want to be certainly respectful of everyone's time so we can wrap up if not. John Fisher, yes.
Hi, question. Um, I'm curious about the relationship with the military. I'm over 50 years ordained. I spent 22 of those working with the Army as a chaplain and went
Yep.
to a lot of different places and wound up as an Army chaplain working with a lot of indigenous clergy and various faith groups. And I wonder if you had the opportunity to connect with any of the military chaplains that would have been accompanying, particularly the National Guard soldiers and active duty also. If you had an opportunity to connect with any of the chaplains from the military, which would be a
That's
fascinating resource.
Yeah, that would probably be a good avenue for us to go through. So one of our Samaritans, one of our active Samaritans is a former colonel in the Army. And so he's been really good at helping us understand what they're doing, and we show them pictures of vehicles or equipment that we're seeing, and so that's helpful. Um, what we have experienced is, you know, if we're able to be one-on-one with, it really is, I mean, the couple times I've been able to talk with privates basically that have just gotten out of boot camp and they don't know what the hell they're doing out there. And so we've been able to have really good conversations with them. Their sergeants are really, my encounters with them is we're not going to talk to you. Um, and so, I think a lot of them just have been told, don't talk to civilians out there. So that's been our experience. But I like the idea of possibly um, working with a chaplain. The issue is most of these units are not, they're being sent here from like, what's the base in? Well, there's a base in, it's not Fort Huachuca, it's actually in El Paso, an Air Force base. Some of them are coming from there, and then the other group are coming from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And
Mhm.
so and I don't know if they have chaplains here with them, is my issue.
They usually always deploy with chaplains when units are sent.
Okay, well, that would be a good avenue for us to find a way to be in conversation with them. Because, really what we always try to do is develop a relationship. And it's hard when the military are out there, they don't want to build that relationship. So that would be the key, is really being able to develop a connection with a chaplain. That's a good avenue. Thank you.
Okay, if I can just add a couple of closing remarks, happy to hang out here for anyone who would still like to stay online and chat and ask some more questions for anyone available. First, especially thanks to Randy for sharing your amazing work and ministry with us. We're so appreciative. Laura had to jump off, but I wanted to say a thank you to her and to our alumni board members who are here that helped to make this possible. This is a new venture for us. It's one that we're hoping to do about once a quarter, with the next one coming up in July. So I would encourage you, if there are topics, if there are alumni that you would wish to hear from, please do share that with myself, with Laura, with any members of our alumni board. Also want to say there are some links in the chat, one to Randy's church. If you're interested in learning more, supporting his good work, please do make note of that. This is also being recorded. I will share this. I see there's a question in the chat about that. We will share this via our news from the Hill that comes out roughly at the end of the month or the beginning of the very next month, on a little bit of a rotating schedule, but it'll be posted to our website if it's something you want to revisit or share with those who couldn't join us. But again, special thanks to everyone, Randy, all of you here in attendance, and thank you for being a part of this.